Good evening, everyone. I'm audible. Please type and tell me if I'm audible. So this is in a series of classes that we've conducted over the past few months, where I've been going live on each weekend. We've been discussing how to solve RC questions. Some of the passage earlier on that I'd created. One moment, please. All right, great. Let's continue the class. There might be some. Please forgive the background noise if there's any. Uh, One moment. All right, please let's resume. Uh, okay. So, in a series of classes that we've been conducting since the past 2 months, I've been discussing how to solve reading comprehension questions. We have created some original questions, or rather, passages created based on newspaper articles that have been asked in The Guardian and Eon. Similar sources say, pehle, CAT has created questions, and we'll use similar sources to create those questions. Past few classes, we have discussed previous year questions as well. So, in today's class, I actually wanted to discuss how to attempt reading comprehension questions, but from a specific point of view, that what would a student do, let's say in the last 20 days or 15 days, which part to focus on, so on and so forth. So one thing that is consistently going to remain a challenge to all of us is going to be speed. uh, by making a few changes in the way questions are asked, CAT can increase the level of difficulty significantly, from the point of view of speed. And then we also have to remain methodical under pressure. So these two things, I would first like to highlight from the point of view of, let's say, if you have 2 weeks, these two broad aspects I would expect all of you all to focus on. uh, in terms of, students often ask, what is the ideal attempt? Is it 2 RCs and then maybe the remaining VA questions, or is it 3 RCs? It's as many questions as you can actually solve. We have to work with the under the assumption that if the paper is difficult for us, it's difficult for everyone else. So, or if it's easy for us, it's easy for everyone else also. So that means we have to actually try and optimize how many questions we can solve. We have to solve maximum possible number of questions. So I expect all of us to optimize speed, and for that, there's a certain kind of practice that we would be expected to do. And the other idea is being methodical under pressure. This too, since there's a, in terms of your logical reasoning questions or quant questions, there is a method or a formula or some logic imposed by the material on us, such as a formula, or some way to arrange some data. But in terms of a VRC passage, which is simply us, words, a string of words being given, to look for a pattern, it's slightly hard. So Apart from this, all our ways of reading are individually quite different. Some students may need to reread sentences often, some may not, and some sentences do need to be reread often. So we need a certain method of reading, and we need the ability to duplicate it uh, over a considerable amount of time for over 40 minutes throughout the paper. Right. So, what is the method, and how do we actually make sure that we maintain it under pressure? Right. So, what is training and how to practice it? Uh, I'll discuss in today's class what is expected from us by the paper, how we would try and practice it by illustrating it through a passage. We'll try and solve a passage, and I'll illustrate what is expected out of us. But what is training in terms of speed? Uh, One way to increase speed is to take mock tests, which will cover your entire paper. So 24, 26, 28. You can even try and solve the earlier patterns, which are 32 questions from VARC. So what I'm saying is, for training, one way to practice from 1991 till today, you can solve all the previous year CAT passages. Some of the passages are really long, some of them are shorter, but all of them have value in terms of, because this is what today's paper is based on. Some of you, if you don't have the time to solve all these passages, can also simply read them and read the solutions as well. But what you're training yourself to do is to read in a specific manner. Uh, the other kind of practice, apart from solving entire papers, is short practice, which is what I actually recommend. So short practice is us simply selecting a bunch of questions. Let's say we select one RC, and we select about two VA questions. Let's say para summary and one para jumble. So for these questions, you can start by giving yourself 11 minutes, or if that's too much of a challenge, you can start by giving yourself 12 minutes. And I've recommended this kind of practice before as well. It's really effective for us to actually work on short sets rather than longer papers. If you consistently do this, even if you can do maybe three of these short tests every day over the course of the next 2 weeks, I guarantee you it's going to help you with in terms of speed. It's going to improve speed and your ability to be methodical under pressure. Um, and where to practice from, how to practice is here. You essentially give yourself 12 minutes at the start, and the hope is you keep bringing this down somewhere close to 10 minutes would be ideal. Uh, the ideal passages to solve would be from 2015 onwards till 2023, previous year passages, if you haven't solved them yet. All right. For your The method that we have to maintain for our entire VRC section is that we are supposed to uh, look at information without context. Since we don't have the topic or the subtopic or any title or any frame of reference, over repeated readings, we have to build that main thesis or main idea of the author, right? This applies to any kind of topic, and this applies to any kind of level of difficulty as well. So sometimes the level of difficulty can be tweaked in three ways, which is sentence length. The longer the sentence, the harder it is for us to maintain you know the ability to spot its subject. So sentence length is a factor. The other factor is difficult language, or new stuff, new concepts which are confusing, right? So three ways to increase or decrease the level of difficulty, but we should develop the ability to simplify a passage despite these factors, and then we need the ability to evaluate information from these passages. So we actually need to, in repeated readings from a more uh, sort of a confused understanding of the passage, which is, let's say, in the first reading, we want to achieve this more simplified but clear understanding of the passage, which is knowing the main point of the author, right? by being methodical, our objective is in the exam or while solving any of these questions, before we go to the options, like broadly speaking, before we go to the options of any question, see, this is not information we can trust. These could be traps, right? But this passage is information we can trust. So we need to first make sure that our understanding of the passage is really clear. This does not mean you have to be really slow in your reading, but you have to be extremely methodical in your reading. You need to make sure that you understand as to why the information is being given to us. So, how do we understand what the main point of the author is? Is there a simpler way to approach this idea? So, any information, let's say a para summary question about 150 words or a passage around 450 words, we can reduce it to this idea, which is about a certain topic in both of these passages. Let's say the author is trying to tell us something specific about a topic. Putting both of these blanks together, suppose we can fill these blanks using words of the authors, right? So putting these blanks together, we'll get the main point of the author from a short passage or a long passage. That's the idea. So before we start reading any kind of passage, here we would be reading a traditional length, which is this is 417 words. So before we read any kind of a passage, we would actually need to keep in mind what method to approach it by. You can add some points to it, you can maybe remove some points from it, but overall, uh, to remain methodical from the point of view of the exam, we are reading to achieve a certain thing, which is from a given piece of written material, we should be able to answer critical or analytical questions, right? So we need to understand why the information is being given to us, not simply what. What is a record of facts? We don't need to retain or memorize these facts. That does not add to any of the process. So we aren't reading to memorize any information, but we are instead reading to figure out what is the main point of the author. This is the quest, correct? So recording of facts is not important. We need to understand why information is given to us. We need to reread sentences, whichever required, to simplify them consciously. So, what are we doing by simplifying them? We're understanding why that information is being presented to us. Once we note its relevance, we can understand its purpose, right? So, that's what we are trying to achieve. The clearer our understanding of the main point, the clearer our approach to the options. Like I said, this passage can be completely trusted in terms of that is whatever the author intended, or seemingly what the author intended. And let's say a question like this, the question can't necessarily be trusted because that's the creation of the examiner. So it could be a very clear, straightforward question, or it could be a tricky question. All right, let's keep this in mind and let's try and answer these two blanks from this passage. I don't want all of you to try and necessarily type. You can try and type though. I'll give you somewhere close to 3 minutes to read this passage. Let's get started. Please read this passage, everyone. All right. So this is a 2014 passage. Uh, so back in the day when the paper was, much longer prior to, just a moment, please. All right. I hope the passage is visible now. Let me go through the passage anyway. So, uh, just to repeat what method we want to practice over the given duration of next 2 weeks, we want to achieve clarity about the passage. There are two challenges to doing this. One is we have to read on screen, we can't really mark on the passage. So, our reading practice has to essentially, entail us. We want to summarize each paragraph and figure out why that information is given to us really quickly. So, what we need to do is we need to pay selective attention to each sentence when we reread it. If you notice, if you read the subject of the first sentence, which is views can freely flourish given certain conditions, based on this idea, the American Constitution is written, which is the people shall not be deprived of the freedom of speech, essentially. And that's a critical component of a free society. Now, after describing this principle to us, the author takes a sort of contradictory view, or rather, this view that despite this, American press, the nature of it has not changed, it's remained the same. And the nature which is same is described to us in the second paragraph, which is conservatives, liberals, all of us, all of them back in the day and today, back in the day meaning in the 1920s and even before, has always been biased. Partisan journalism can be, despite this, partisan journalism can be good journalism. So, despite this negative trait, it can be good journalism. It produces plenty of excellent reporting. So, the author has again presented a sort of this contradictory view that there are these issues with this freedom of speech playing out in actual society, which is the media is biased, but this bias can carry some benefits or can be overall beneficial to society. Excellent reporting analysis. Now, in terms of interpretation of what freedom means, the last paragraph tells us through the eyes of the Supreme Court, which is that laws that allowed publications to be punished for these several reasons, libel, obscenity, sedition, publishing inflammatory material. So all of these laws have given way to more expansive rights to publish. So these laws have been, let's say, liberalized or loosened over time. Their interpretation has been uh, expanded to cover the content of nearly all the papers. So we are told about what the law in theory is, how it's played out in practice in terms of its divisive nature. That divisive nature, according to the author, can be of benefit to society. It can produce excellent reporting and analysis. How free the press is has been uh, opened up by the court from the point of view of more and more newspapers are considered under it, and more laws which were initially considered as problematic are now more expansive. So the press, let's say, has become more liberalized. The laws have become more liberalized. Now, with this idea of the main point that we have created, we should proceed to the questions. With the questions, if you notice, now we are into a different realm of reading, which is that we had interpreted the passage first, which was information we could trust, in a certain way, we achieved understanding of the main point of the passage, uh, about the topic, which is evolution and role of a free state in American society. The author says, while the press has been historically partisan, which is biased, and remains politicized, which is again biased, it serves as a critical component of democracy, with the protections expanding over time. So the laws have expanded over time to encompass a broad range of journalistic voices. So the main point of the author is clear to us. Now that we have analyzed the information, now we can proceed to the questions, which are essentially analytical, critical, and could be options, especially crafted in ways that they could be traps. So since it's information we cannot trust, what we want to remember is, we need a certain set of instructions for us to be, methodical. One is that we need to have really specific words or phrases associated with your decision. If you decide to eliminate option A, for example, you need to have a specific set of words or phrases which you find problematic, either in terms of what the question is asking or in terms of applicability to the passage. Then, to check whether a certain set of words are acceptable or not, we need to go back to the passage and to check word by word, right? And for this, to go through the passage, for example, if let's read the first question here. According to the author, which of the following is true about partisan journalism throughout American history? We know this would be contained in the second and third paragraph if possible, right? So we need to use the structure of the passage to our advantage. So let's quickly go through the question here, and I just want all of you to try and find a specific word or phrase for your decisions for eliminating or selecting an option. All right. Please start with the first question here. All right, others, if, please type in your answers. So, according to the author, which of the following is true about partisan journalism throughout American history? It's a straightaway factual question, which we need to look at information from the second and the third paragraph, like I told you. Um, Here, let's start with option A first. Sometimes, remember this while practicing as well. For some questions, it's beneficial to read the information first, such as reading these two paragraphs first from the first paragraph, uh, from the second paragraph and the third paragraph on. And for some questions, it's beneficial to read the questions first. Here, going through two paragraphs first is going to be really time consuming. It's not worth our time. So we start with the options first. And what the analytical method we want to practice is that we need to read the option and then reread it to figure out which word we are going to choose as whether problematic or whether, a correct inference based on the passage. So let's look at option A. It has, according to the author, which of the following is true about journalism throughout American history? The question itself has called the journalism partisan, right? A says it has a limited impact on the political process. Uh, in terms of the passage, we are told that clearly the laws have also changed. The political process has had like going back to the 1920s, significant amount of interactions in terms of each newspaper was geared towards a specific political niche. So we can in the second paragraph at the last line, if you notice, the political niche that overlaps with these newspapers tells us that there was political impact. So limited political impact would be invalid. So if you notice the exact phrase that we have, which is problematic in option A, is limited impact. So this is what I mean by looking for a specific set of words which are problematic and then eliminate an option. If we simply solve questions based on how options sound to us, that's a reason to make mistakes. That's most commonly the reason to make mistakes. Because examiners know this, they'll create options which sound as problematic or maybe sound as correct, but they're not. Here, limited impact makes A invalid. Let's look at B. Its lack of objectivity is detrimental. If you notice, again, this is in the third paragraph. We are told that this is actually beneficial. It produces excellent reporting and analysis, and is the norm in many nations. So uh, it has a beneficial impact on society as a whole. So we can't say lack of objectivity is detrimental. It would be the opposite. Uh, C says it has played an important role in reliably informing individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds. This has not been mentioned in the passage. D, however, it has essentially been the status quo since America's founding. If you remember, this was a part of the main point that we had noticed. The last sentence of the first paragraph. Since the time of America's founding, the politicized nature of press has not fundamentally changed. This was the main point that the author has evolution of press. The press has been historically partisan, remains politicized. So this is the fundamental part of the main point of the author. So option D is the correct choice here. We have found problematic words in each options A and B. C is problematic from a different point of view. If we went looking for option C, we would not find any information about option C. So option C is beyond scope of the passage, which is what we call it. Option D is the right choice in this case. Let's look at question 2 here. All right. Please start with question 2, everyone. All right. Let's start with question to those of you who want to type in their answers can. Which of the following statements about American newspapers is supported by the information contained in the passage? The newspapers, first, in general, what the newspapers represent is covered in the second and the third paragraph, which is that newspapers have been divided. And in the fourth paragraph, if you notice, legally the Supreme Court has told us how free the American press is in terms of interpretation of the law. By interpreting the law, it has affected all the newspapers in the last line of the fourth paragraph, which is the Constitution's protections were broadly held to cover the content of all papers, from the highly regarded New York Times to tabloids such as National Enquirer. So we are told of different newspapers here as well. So three paragraphs, the second, third, and fourth, which are speaking about the American press. That's the information we would be required to go through. There's no point in doing that before. Let's start with each option and let's look for any problematic words if we find. A says America's newspapers in 1789 resembled those of today in form and content. Uh, in form and content, we can't say. In terms of the bipartisan nature, we can say that has not fundamentally changed. So form and content has remained the same would be problematic. So let's say the words and content are problematic to us, and let's place option A aside. Let's look at option B. The character of the press has matured since the time of America's founding. This also, if we notice, has we can't say has been stated. In fact, we are told the press has not fundamentally changed. In recent years, the press has become biased in regards to its political reporting. We know option C is definitely invalid because the author is actually stating the opposite. This is not a recent phenomenon. This is a very this is foundational. This phenomenon is true since the time or since the formation of American constitution or society. So C is invalid outright because of the word has become biased in recent years because of those words. D states very straightforwardly, which is early American journalists did not necessarily provide a balanced analysis of events. The press nature of the press as politicized and biased has not changed fundamentally. So option D is the clear choice. With each option A and B and C, we had problems with a specific set of words. Option D provides a clear analysis of the second and the third paragraph, which is even the start of the last line of the first paragraph, which is that journalism throughout America has remained biased in terms of their reporting. But no, we can't say therefore, like, if someone goes with option A, which some of the students had in prior classes when I discussed the 2014 passage, is that form and content cannot be right, because we can say the nature has remained the same, but what they've been discussing or and so on and so forth could probably change or may have changed. There's nothing informed about that in the passage. All right. Let's start with the third question. All right, I'll explain C of the prior passage as well. Please type in your answers for this question. The author of the passage would disagree with which of the following statements? This is one of those questions where we don't have any point of reading the passage before we have to go through each individual option. Let's start with option A. The legal understanding of press freedoms has shifted over time. This would be the last paragraph where, through the eyes of the Supreme Court, we are told how the law is being interpreted, what has been, now loosely interpreted, libel, obscenity, sedition, and inflammatory material, whatever can be considered as inflammatory. These have been given way to more expansive rights. Now, option A says the legal understanding of press freedoms has shifted over time. So here, shifted is generic. It doesn't tell us whether it has shifted for good or for bad, or rather for more a liberal interpretation or for a more narrow interpretation. But shifted is still true, right? So the author would not necessarily disagree with option A. The option A records a shift. It just doesn't tell us the direction or the nature of the shift. Option B says over time, the First Amendment protections offered to the press have become absolute. Absolute is a problematic word. If you notice, the interpretation has actually changed over time. It has shifted over time, like option A has said. So, absolute seems like it could be the right choice. One thing that we need to remember about questions is we need to make sure that we go through the other options despite this. Many times we read the option for the first time in an incorrect way, and we'll go on to mark it, and then we realize later that if we had just invested 20 seconds more, we could have maintained accuracy. So this is something about being methodical that you would have to practice and ingrain through your practice over the course of next 2 weeks. I'll discuss a little about how many questions to practice and what target to set if your accuracy is, let's say you want to make sure that your consistency in your mock test improves and your score also improves. So, what are the two kinds of practice to do? I'll shortly discuss after today's class. So, A and B have, we know B is the problem. Let's look at C and D. America's legal evolution has given way to more liberal understanding, which is valid. First Amendment press rights today protect a broad section of the newspaper industry, which is the last line of the passage. So A, C, and D have clearly been mentioned in the last paragraph of the passage. Through the eyes of the Supreme Court, the law has been now more liberally interpreted. This has been applicable to all newspapers pretty much. So A, C, and D can be found. The word absolute makes option D invalid. Again, the method that we are supposed to practice is that we're looking for a specific word or phrase for a specific decision. We go to the passage and check word by word when required, and we also use the structure of the passage. Let me use this to actually discuss option C of the second question here. Which of the following statements about American newspapers is supported by information contained in the passage? We are looking for a valid inference from the passage, which, or let's say, a valid conclusion that we can make from the passage. So we need some definite words stated in the passage. Uh, an actual, sorry to go back to this, but this is again very important. An actual set of words in the passage, which will indicate that a valid conclusion or a valid inference can be made. So now we're looking for a specific set of words for each word in option C, right? uh, in recent years, so about any understanding about recent years, if you notice, is, let's read the last sentence of the first passage, the last line. Nature of the press has not fundamentally changed, so we can tell that today's press is the same as press of old. uh, the press has become biased in regard to its political reporting. This is actually not true. Conservatives and liberals alike claim that today's mainstream media is biased. But if you read the second line of the second paragraph, American newspapers at the time of this nation's birth were all partisan. So we don't know the source of the passage. Seems to be like some American newspaper. In any case, the newspaper is stating that all the newspapers from back in the day were partisan. This means it's not a recent phenomenon. So, actually, option C, by stating the words in recent years, is stating the opposite of what the passage intended. All right. Uh, I hope that's clear for option question three. Option B is the right choice. The word absolute is problematic. Now let's proceed to question four. Please go through the question and type in your answers. All right. Others type in your answers. A question like question number four, which has this word accept. This type of a question expects that there are three valid acceptable options which can be found in the passage, either as directly stated, or as inferences, or as assumptions. We need to find three valid statements, and these are not our answer. The exception, which is an invalid statement, would be an answer. So let's look at option A, which is articles deemed maliciously defamatory of individuals. We are looking at examples of limitations the courts have placed on freedom of press. Again, the last paragraph, which has been used in actually close to three of the questions, definitely two of the questions directly. So articles deemed maliciously defamatory, we're looking to interpret essentially the second line of the passage and four words of the passage. Uh, Publishing inflammatory material has been written, and libel has been written, which is maliciously defamatory articles of individuals. So option A is actually covered. It's covered almost from a vocabulary point of view, where it's being checked whether we know the meaning of the word libel or not, or libel or not. In any case, option A has been covered in the passage and is not our answer. Option B, which says articles viewed as offensive to society's views of decency, and obscenity has been mentioned as the second word in the second line of the last paragraph. Uh, so again, a valid option and not our answer. Option D also, articles clearly dangerous to national security. Sedition also, which is in terms of information that goes against national security or the existence of a nation inherently. So these articles also have now been given a more liberal interpretation. So option D also has been covered in the passage and is not our answer. Option C is the correct choice, which is articles that comment negatively on a political affiliation. Uh, all right. So this covers a passage which is exactly 417 words and has four questions. This is actually very close to the RCs that have been covered. that have been asked in the past 2 years. So this brings me to my final point. How do I practice and where do I practice from? This is a question, this is a RC from the 2014 paper, which had two more RCs of similar length. And you can actually use any of the papers from 2014 till last year. Those are really relevant. Even the past papers from 1991 till 2008 are, all of the past CAT papers are actually relevant. Depends on how much time you would like to give. So if you have, let's say, a limited amount of time, I would recommend papers from 2014 to the current time zone. And the other thing to remember while selecting questions for your short tests for practicing for speed, which is what I was discussing at the start of class. So our target of discussion was, how do we achieve a certain speed, how do we improve speed, and how do we remain methodical under pressure. So solve short tests which would have a passage followed by a few VA questions, and try and make sure that the time taken for these short tests for each of these, let's say 8 questions, you could try and solve over 14 minutes, or rather 6 questions for over 10 minutes. So some tests of this nature, and try and do these tests maybe 2 or 3 throughout the day, which won't take up as much time, but will actually help you achieve improvements in both speed and being methodical. uh, as for micro practice, remember to state the purpose of your reading, which is maintaining this sort of an outlook or these principles while reading. Have clarity about this idea before you start the reading process. Similarly, also have clarity about the elimination process, how we make sure that we identify problematic words in each of the options. This is the method that we would like to drill over the course of the next 2 weeks. And the more number of repetitions you actually do, which is essentially the more number of short tests or passages that you solve, you're going to see significant improvements in the days to come. So, with this, I'd like to bring today's class to an end. I've discussed how to actually, what targets to set, how to actually practice them, where to practice them. Before I bring the class to an end, there'll be information in the in the description of the class provided to you, which is about the next class and what would be the next class, what the topic of the next class would be. Anything with regards to today's class, and if anything else is could be helpful to you from the point of view of your preparation, do let us know, and we would you know try and make that accommodation as well. So with this, let's bring today's class to an end. All the prior classes will be of benefit to you. If you've only tuned in for today's class, that's of use to you. Currently, you can try and go back if you have some time, and go back through the prior classes. We have discussed passages of a similar level of difficulty with a similar depth in terms of the analysis. All right, so with this, I'll bring today's class to an end. Thank you, everyone.